welcome back to episode 3 of our Money Matters series. Today, we're going to talk about future proofing your finances for every stage of life. So, Josh and I are going to kind of talk through how you should approach your financial planning, investment strategy to maximize your outcome no matter what stage of life you're in. So, hopefully, you'll be confident going forward of what your next steps are. Hey, Josh, how are you?
I'm doing great, Christina. How are you doing?
I am doing excellent. I'm really excited to talk through this topic today because I think that we have a lot of listeners that span all different generations and all different, I would say, chapters of our lives, right? And so our listeners range from, you know, going to be college graduates to newly grads, launching their career, maybe starting a family, to looking at retirement. And I think people not only are intimidated when they think about financial planning, but they don't know what's the right strategy for each of those chapters. So, I guess my first question for you would be if I am, a young adult who's newly out on my own, how do I even approach financial planning?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's funny because almost everyone I talk to, the first thing they'll always say is if I knew what I knew today, I could go back to my 20s, how I would do things differently. I think the key is the fact that you are still so early in your journey when it comes to financial planning that we don't have to have it all figured out because it's going to continue to evolve. So, right now, when you're starting this life out, the focus is just trying to figure out who you are. What do you like? What do you dislike? And also recognizing the biases and saying like I don't know much about this, so do I either avoid it or do I want to lean in and ask questions? Do I want to go talk to people who've gone through this before and say like, hey, should I sign up for this 401k, or how do I budget, or like start some of those things. So a lot of times when I'm thinking of people in their 20s, really just starting life out, there's a couple main things that I like to talk about. The first is definitely try to find a mentor. Find someone who is maybe 10, 20 years ahead of schedule and ask them the question, if you could go back into my shoes and do something different, what would you do different and why? And that's a really great starting point. And it's funny, I think we should all do that. Even us who are in our 30s, 40s, and 50s, try to find someone 20 years, 30 years older and ask them that question. And that can really shed a bunch of light on different ways to be better with our money. I think the other thing that's really important to understand is how powerful compound interest is. I mean, you always hear those things, but like to really sit down and look at it on paper, it's pretty shocking of the fact that if you could start saving, especially if you can start investing in your early 20s, even if it's really small amounts, just something to start going, that money being able to compound for 30, 40, 50 years before you touch it, it's going to be amazing to see how much that can turn into, which inevitably requires less work for you long term.
I
And so
love
we'll be
that.
talking here in a little bit about some of those goals for when you're older, but if you can start some of that planning while you're young, it makes it way easier.
I love that. I love a couple of things you said. One, compound interest. A lot of times people hear that and they think, oh, I can't figure that out. But compound interest is really what we mean when we say making your money work for you, right? So it's working in the background while you're not doing anything. And then the other thing that you alluded to is really knowing who you are and getting a mentor. And then, but you alluded to something we addressed pretty extensively in one of our previous episodes, which is your money mindset, right? So knowing what your biases are and what your mindset is towards money and financial planning, and truly taking an honest look at that so that you can set yourself up for success. So I really appreciate that comment as well. So we know that as we're starting out, we're going to take a mentor. We're going to learn from other people's mistakes or maybe successes, right? And we're going to look at ourselves and know what we like. And we're going to start down this financial path. As we talked about in one of our previous episodes, we would want to meet with our financial planner at least once a year to kind of reevaluate where we are, ensure we're on track. So, at what point in our lives do we need to consider a different change or a pivot? And so I guess the question is, sometimes people want to think about our lives in these like decades, like in your 20s, you do this, in your 30s, you do this. Is that really the measure of when we pivot? Or is it something different, like when I have kids, when I start a career, when I purchase a home? Like, what are those triggers that a person should think, oh, this is a time outside of my annual plan that I should reevaluate my financial plan?
Yeah, and it's always easier when you're early in the game because you have more time to play catch up to whatever that goal might be. And it doesn't have to always be money. It could be working out. It could be a career path, whatever that could be. The 20s is definitely that chance to test drive things and explore it and be able to adjust because you have a lot of time traditionally to be able to do those things. But I also don't think there has to be a timeline. Christina, I'm sure you have a lot of friends and colleagues who have made major life pivots financially, career, families. Maybe they're splitting up with their spouse, having to make a pivot. That happens at any stage in life. But I think the key is making sure that you don't let that truly deviate from the overall goals that maybe you have because sometimes the goals are still going to be the same regardless on how you're addressing those goals.
And so maybe it is that, like to your point, we talk about that it's not necessarily always a financial goal, or even our financial goals can look like own a vacation home or go on vacation every year, whatever. It's almost like, how do you want to set yourself up for your lifestyle? And so the question that we really need to be asking ourselves is, have my goals changed? If I'm an individual and I planned these goals that are, mine on my own, and then I get married, have those goals changed? Do I have two incomes now? Am I able to reach them more quickly? And on the flip side of that, if you happen to be getting separated or divorced, you had two incomes, or maybe you lost a job. And so, how does that really change your ability to work towards your goals? Is really more of a better question. Did I understand that correctly?
And that's exactly right. I mean, I think it's even for myself, the way I address financial planning for my family is we plan knowing that our plans are not going to go to plan. I think that's a really big piece to it is we're doing our best with what we know, but we also know that what we got is not the same as what we're going to have. And so whenever we're going through that, we want to make sure that we give ourselves that grace. So early in your 20s, when you're working through what you're trying to accomplish, you may say, I want to buy a house before I turn 30, or I want to be able to, grow to this certain level in my career, or I want to get married, or I want to have kids, or whatever it might be. Start working towards those things. Put the energy, do the research, ask people about different ways to get there. But I also think it's okay for you to be able to be comfortable knowing that it's probably going to change along the way as well. And the 20s is a great time to be experimenting through some of those things.
Yeah, I love that. That actually reminded me of like a birth plan, right? Well, I'm a pharmacist by education. And so anytime I was talking to an expectant mom, they would talk about their birth plan and, they do want this or don't want that. And I think all of the best OBGYNs tell you we can have a birth plan, but at the end of the day, we we know it's not going to go like that. And then the other
Yeah.
thing, which I'm actually doing right now in my current career, which is we just make the decisions with the information that we have at the time, right? The best decisions we can with the information we have today, knowing that tomorrow we're going to have some new information and the decision may be reinforced or it may need to pivot, and that's okay, right? All right. So we've kind of talked about starting out your financial plan, and we've talked about pivoting, or maybe not even pivoting, but just keeping your eye on the prize as life changes. And so, what is the time period in your life when, or maybe there isn't one, I don't know, when you're you have your financial plan in place? Let's say you're married, you have the kids, you're done having kids, you're in your career, you're kind of just, you're going down the track. And so, things seem to be in place and we know they're going to change in one way or another. You could have a death where you inherit some money, you could have a career change, a job loss, whatever. So, what is it in that time period when you're kind of on the plan that you need to think about or consider in order to maximize your opportunity during those times?
Yeah, it's a great question, and that's going to happen. There's going to be situations in life where everything is going to be tight, and you're going to feel like you just have to kind of sit back and just work through the steps. Don't worry about the big picture goals because of where you are. And then there's gonna be those times in life where you're actually feeling a little bit more comfortable because you're maybe between two different phases of life that you're trying to get to. And to what you mentioned earlier, Christina, whether it's with a financial planner or even if it's just on your own, giving yourself time, dedicated time throughout the year to reflect on what you're doing and look at your planning and make sure you actually have some purpose tied behind it. I think that's where even in the 20s, or especially if you're stepping into your 30s, where you're starting to maybe move into that family planning or growing into your career, life starts getting a little bit busier often, and that time can tend to fall away. But if you can have built that habit to do those things early in your career, it's amazing how much that stuff also compounds on its own as well.
It's so interesting. A couple of things that I heard there is one, it sounds like a lot of discipline, right? It's, are we being intentional and disciplined with our financial plan? And that starts with, are we putting it on the calendar? Are we blocking off that time to sit with it, right? And not just to check the box, but to truly say, okay, let's check in, let's see where we're going and where we want to go, and are we on track? And then also to have goals where, you have, I mean, I don't know if you endorse this or not, but like where you have rewards, right? So my husband and I had a situation where we were debt free, and then we decided to start a business, and we went into some debt in order to start the business. And so then one of our goals was, once we, you know, got the debt down, back down, and was eliminated, then we were going to reward ourselves with X, right? Whether that be a trip here, or, you know, opening a nice bottle of wine that we've had set aside, like whatever that is, but just something to celebrate those, right? So, one, operating with intentionality, two, being disciplined to review it on a regular basis, and then three, making sure that along the way you're having some fun, right? So that you're rewarding yourself when you hit certain milestones, whether that's pay off your student loan debt, or pay off your home, or purchase a home, like whatever those goals are.
Yeah, and I think the idea of discipline is you're exactly right. I think it requires work to be doing these things, and the idea of discipline, if it was as easy as it sounds, then I'd be running marathons all the time. I'd be waking up at 4 o'clock every day. Like I would be able to be this perfect version, but life is not that easy. And so another big thing that we like to try to look at is can we at least set a baseline to what we're trying to accomplish, and then we can build on it through the discipline. So a great example would be, if you have a 401k at work, at least get the match, at least set up a contribution to get the free value that you get out of that. If the company says, hey, you put in 6%, we'll match you 100% of that, where they put in 6% too, you should be doing that. And then from there, then you can stair step and work on your discipline to say, hey, my goal is 10%, and I'm gonna start working myself. Maybe next year I'll move it to 8, next year I'll move it to 9, and we can stair step into it. But you're exactly right. It does require you to keep your eye on the ball, and if you can set some parameters that kind of goes for you in the background of life, it's gonna make it a lot easier for you to get this thing going too.
So we kind of talked about, once you're up and running, and pivoting as life comes at you. So as we're approaching the other end of life, right? So you're looking towards retirement, and you're potentially on the horizon of retirement, or retirement's on the horizon, I guess I should say. And you're marching towards that. Does anything change? Should your risk tolerance change? Is there, and I know there's not a cookie cutter answer for everyone, but are there like some truths that people can hold on to as they're approaching that time period in their life?
Yeah, a lot of people think of it as this like second half of life almost in a sense. It's a totally different stage of the game. You spent your whole time raising kids. You were working 40, 50 hours a week. Life has just always been busy, and then all of a sudden you wake up and it's like different. And so one of the things people they forget to think about is just the fact that's a big part of this whole thing is what are we doing in retirement? What does retirement even mean to us? For a lot of my clients that I'm working with that are in their 50s and maybe even in their 60s that we're having like those true conversations of that next step in life, the conversation's about not just how much money do you have, but it's what are we going to do with all your hard work? One of the things I think is one of the saddest parts that I see for a lot of retirees is they undervalue the hard work that they put into it. They have enough savings or investing or whatever that they did that they could go to vacation twice a year or three times a year. They could help save for their grandkids' college. They can do a lot of fun things, but instead they're at home eating ramen noodles, trying not to spend their money because they're just terrified that it's going to run out. And so I think a big step early on is if you can do it yourself, definitely give it a try. But if you can't, don't feel bad about trying to find a financial planner to help partner with you on it. But it's spending time looking at your balance sheet and seeing what have I maximized, what do I have currently. Let's not judge if it's enough or whatever it might be. Is what's there, and what does that give me, and where are the risks that I may run into. And if I have a 5 to 10 year runway before my true retirement, that gives me enough time to then spend on how do I solve those risks. Is it a risk of being too aggressive in the stock market? And do we need to dial back? Or do we have a really good savings account? And maybe we can be a little bit more aggressive because if the market gets crazy, we don't need the money for a couple of years. There's some of those things that we'll be able to start navigating. 5 to 10 years out from retirement, that's a crucial stage for you to start spending time working through those things.
I had written down that I was going to ask you what are some of the most common mistakes that you see people make? And I feel like we've touched on some of those, but maybe we just quickly recap for our audience. What are the common mistakes? And I will go ahead and pull forward from one of our previous episodes that the biggest mistake that people make is just not paying attention. And
Yeah,
so what are some of those
yeah.
other ones that go along with that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the biggest ones. And it's not to anyone's fault. It really life is just busy. We have a lot going on, and then if we're doing a really good job, we're saving in a lot of different places. We don't just have one account. We may have some accounts at work. We may have some accounts that are at the bank. We may have some accounts with a financial advisor. So it can get a little bit overwhelming, and it's amazing the amount of people that I'll talk to, and I'll say, hey, put together your balance sheet, send it over to me, and we'll have a meeting. And the first thing they say in that meeting is, I haven't done that in a really long time. And it's just an eye opener to see like how are we doing? Where is all the money? How's it working together? That's definitely a big part. I think early on, it's about just starting. I think that's the key is just starting something, especially if you have some work benefits like a 401k. You should try to take advantage of that. If you don't, if you're in a self-employed role or whatever that might be, recognize that you probably should have something and go find an IRA or something that you can start putting some money in and taking advantage of that compound interest. When you start moving into your 30s and 40s, then we start talking about some other complexities where it's, if I'm having a baby, I have 18 years till college. Do I want to start saving for that? And if you do, it's way easier to have 18-year runway to save than only a 5-year runway to save. Compound interest, it's the same thing. So those things also tend to become more relevant and easier to keep an eye on when you're having these touch points with yourself or with your financial advising group along the way.
I like that. So this just came to me. So if you're comfortable speaking to it, I would really like your perspective on
Sure.
this. Not everyone has children. Not everyone has someone that they are going to pass this wealth on to. And so, well, I guess maybe it is for people who do have children and who don't. So like as you're approaching the end of your life, right? And you're preparing for what happens to this wealth that you've amassed, what are the considerations for someone with children to think through? And then also for someone without children, right? Because not everyone has, children. It's a lifestyle choice, it's a life decision, and both are equally okay, but they're very different approaches as you come to the end of life. And so how do those differ?
Yeah, well, on one hand, you can talk a lot about legacy planning, and legacy is, do I want to leave something behind for future generations, or is it do I want to leave something behind to charity? We have a lot of clients who don't have kids, who are not married, who still have a big aspiration for legacy. It just may not be to their kids. It may be to their nieces and nephews. It may be to their church. It may be to the hospital that they work at. So sometimes legacy can be important for everyone, but it also can be different for everyone. Some of the things that we do also take into consideration is, if you're navigating this financial plan on your own, it's not an unhealthy idea to maybe develop some relationship with an accountability buddy along the way. That could be one of your best friends, it could be your sibling, it could be that financial advisor that we were talking about. But there is so much complexity in the world of finances, and then once you start learning it, a new president comes in and changes the laws, and then it's like a whole nother world, and then it constantly is going to evolve and change. And so having someone that you can bounce those ideas off of, that tends to really help just everyone in general. Um, the other thing that I look at a lot of times is when you're on your own, especially deeper in life. Let's say you're in your 80s or 90s, you may get to a point in time where you need people to help support you and take care of you, just because you're at a different stage in life. And so, what does that mean for some people? That might mean a long-term care situation. Other people that might mean, if you have kids, it's a moving in with the kids. If you don't have kids, it's is there someone else that you can join up with on that. I think the question that you have is a really relevant one, because what I hear is the fact that there's so many different people that are listening to this, and a lot of these responses that we're talking about can feel almost cookie cutter, where it's like, we'll save for retirement. What if you don't want to retire? What if you want to work to 95? So everyone has to really spend that time, like we mentioned earlier, first just understanding what are your goals, and your goals are your goals, or no one else's. And once you have some ideas around that, then you take a step back and figure out what needs to be done to accomplish those. And it doesn't have to always be about finances. It could also be about lifestyle. Do I want to work forever? Do I want to move into charity work when I retire? Do I want to sell my house and move to Spain? Like everyone's gonna have a different thing, and if you can start there, the rest of it can come going forward.
So my last question that I had for you, I think you actually just answered, which is what simple guidelines can someone use to make investment decisions with confidence? And if I hear you correctly, no matter what stage, I know we spoke to it about like a young adult, but no matter what stage you are, the most important thing is knowing who you are and what success looks like to you. And then looking at your financial status and then your financial goals, defining them, paying attention to them. And then if you know who you are and you know what you're trying to accomplish and you're making decisions that are in line with that, then you should have every confidence in the world that you're on the right track because you've checked the boxes, and especially to your point, using the tools that you're at hand, right? So bringing in a financial planner, bringing in a mentor to say, don't forget about this. Have you thought about that? And really sets us up for success. So I guess I will change my last piece of advice to say, if there was one thing that you would tell someone, and I think I know your answer, but what would it be? Like in regards to financial planning, what would be your number one piece of advice for anyone at any stage?
I think the biggest thing is don't worry about where you could be. Focus on where you are. I think that's the biggest thing. And the second thing that I haven't talked about it ties to all this, it doesn't matter if you're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. It's really easy to talk about all the fun stuff, investing, growing, going on vacation, all the things that are like I call the offensive side of financial planning, where you're like proactively working towards these goals. You need to have an equal level of energy and focus on the defensive side of life too. And that could be the fact that some people are going to get sick. Some people are going to pass away. Some people are going to lose their job. Some people are going to have, their house, burned down. I mean, events happen, and very rarely does someone get through all of life without having something bad happen at some point along the way. It's just life that we live, and so we want to make sure that with all of this, a big piece of this is also making sure that you're talking about the biggest risks that could cause your financial plan to fail too. So a couple of the main ones that I want to make sure that I do hit on. Um, One is that risk of losing your job or risk of having a major expense pop up. But before you can be a really good investor, you need to be a pretty decent saver. And that's something that I think is a really big piece of this. A lot of people will be big time investors and they'll grow, and then I'll look at their balance sheet and they'll have $100 in their savings account. And there is just no room for error. If the market's down, they lose their job, everything can start falling itself backwards. Having a true emergency fund that mimics somewhere around 3 to 6 months of your cost of living is a really good goal to have. The other big one is if you don't have a big enough balance sheet just yet, or you don't have a spousal income that can carry the family all the way through on their own, make sure that you have true clarity on what happens if you become disabled. Disabilities don't always mean these crazy severe situations. It could mean you have a pinched nerve in your back and you just can't get out of bed for a few months. I mean, it could mean that you're going through chemotherapy, so you're out for 2 years. But 2 years of being out of work, that can change everything. And so we want to make sure we're planning for that. And then if you have people that rely on you, like kids, spouse, things like that, we definitely want to make sure that you spend some time understanding and putting in place your estate plan, a will or a trust. Make sure you have the appropriate life insurance if it's needed, going through all those pieces. And so if we're really doing a good job for financial planning, we spend time talking about the goals. Let's lay out how we attack those goals. And then we need to do a little bit of that depressing part of it, which is like what causes these goals to fail, and make sure we're spending time addressing those parts as well.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point about a lot of people like to focus on the offensive side, and the defensive side sometimes, or the protection side, um, gets neglected, for lack of a better word. And how do we prepare for those life events? And that could be all of the things you mentioned, and litigation, even, right? Like,
Yeah.
we are all at risk of coming against a situation that we're just not prepared for. And so, mentally, emotionally, and then obviously financially. And so, ensuring that we are set up for success and that we have a plan that's solid enough that allows us to navigate life's challenges, whatever those may be. So, I appreciate that so much. I'm really excited that you took the time again today to join us. And I've really enjoyed talking through all of the different pieces of financial planning at all the stages of life, so that hopefully our listeners have learned they can self identify where they are. And I would have guessed that your advice would have been to just start. So I just want to reiterate to all of our listeners that one of the things that Josh shared with us on an earlier episode, if you haven't heard those, I encourage you to go listen to them, which is the best thing you can do no matter where you are is to start. Start paying attention, take an evaluation, and start the conversation. So thank you so much. And with that, we'll wrap up, and until next time.
Yes. Thanks, Christina.
Thanks.